The United States Attorney's Office here in D.C., our U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro and her team. A prosecutor stayed up all night long, didn't sleep all day yesterday, making sure that we got what we needed from all over the country. It included search warrants in California, search warrants here in D.C., multiple interviews that have been conducted already of witnesses and of family members of the charged individual. And continue to work hard today. This investigation is ongoing. It's not complete. A lot of the information that the media is hearing through leaks or sources, some of it is true, some of it is not true, and at the right time, you will hear information from us as appropriate. I'd like to ask our U.S. Attorney, Jeanine Pirro, to say a few words, and then followed by Director Patel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. Cole Allen's journey of accountability in the criminal justice system starts today. Todd Blanche just indicated to you the charges. Those charges are only 3 charges that are in the complaint that has been presented in federal district court about an hour ago. There will be additional charges as this investigation continues to unfold. But make no mistake, this was an attempted assassination of the President of the United States, with the defendant making clear what his intent was. And that intent was to bring down as many of the high-ranking cabinet officials as he could. This is the kind of situation that we cannot tolerate. And as the Attorney General has just indicated, it could have been so much worse, but for the reality that we had the Secret Service as well as the Metropolitan Police Department and the FBI. Now, the facts make it very clear what this intent was. You may recall that it was on March 2nd that the president indicated that he would be attending this public event at the Hilton. And on April 6th, that's when Cole Allen first made a hotel reservation at the Washington Hilton for 3 nights, the 24th, the 25th, and the 26th. It was on April 21st that he traveled all the way from the West Coast, from his home near L.A. He gets to Chicago on April 23rd, and has been indicated he arrives in D.C. on the 24th, and he checks into the hotel at about 3 p.m. He stays overnight. He is very much aware that the president and the first lady entered the ballroom at 8 p.m. And it was at 8:40 that he made a decision to rush the ballroom. And thank goodness, law enforcement, the Secret Service, was able to prevent him from getting into that ballroom. He was not injured other than some kind of scrape on his knee. Now, as indicated, these are the weapons that the defendant had on his person. You can see that's a 12-gauge pump-action Mossberg shotgun. It's a .38 semi-automatic. He had at least 3 knives and all kinds of paraphernalia. So any suggestion that he wasn't there to do harm is absurd. We will prove when he purchased these guns. They were purchased in California. Why is that relevant? It is relevant because he crossed interstate lines with those firearms, and those are the firearms that he used on the night of the 25th, or attempted to use at the very least. Now, the manifesto also makes clear about his expected rules of engagement. You know, you can look at it and read it, and it may seem kind of la-la-la, but at the end, make no mistake, he says, I am targeting the administration officials. They are my targets, and I'm prioritizing from the top down, the highest ranking from the lowest. And I will not hesitate to get involved in any kind of encounter with anyone who blocks me from the president. Now, finally, let me say one thing. Within days of the president nominating me to be the United States Attorney for the District of Columbia, I was at the scene of a double homicide, where one Elias Rodriguez crossed state lines from Chicago with a firearm to commit a felony in the district. He's now indicted for the murder of two individuals, Laron Lashinsky and Sarah Milgram, here in Washington. Not long after that, another individual, Ramanullah Lockenwall, crossed state lines, again with a firearm, with intent to commit a felony here in Washington. He traveled from the state of Washington. He is now indicted with the murder of Sarah Beckstrom, a National Guardsman, and the attempted murder of National Guard Andrew Wolf. Today, we have Cole Allen, another individual, charged with crossing state lines coming from California with a firearm with the intent to commit a felony here in the district. Let this be a message to anyone who thinks that Washington, D.C. is the place to act out political violence. And if you are willing to do so with a firearm and cross state lines, we will find you, we will track your steps from the inception of your plan, and we will prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law. Washington, D.C. is not the place to travel to commit acts of violence. The Constitution and the laws of the United States permit us to register our views through our voices and our votes. What they don't permit is making your views known through violence, especially violence directed at the President of the United States. This is anti-democratic at its core.
Thank you, Judge. Excuse me. Thank you, General. This one hits a little differently. We were all there. Many of you were there. Many of you watching were there as well. The President was there. The Vice President was there. The Cabinet was there. And what you saw described by the General and the U.S. Attorney is absolutely true. The President spoke on late Saturday evening with the message of unity and a backing of law enforcement, and we have followed through on that message of unity and the effectuation of law enforcement across this country. This FBI is grateful to the United States Secret Service, the Department of Homeland Security, and our interagency partners, including the Metropolitan Police Department, for swiftly jumping into action. All of us on there put us in a unique position, but all of us also acted uniquely. The Washington field office jumped into action immediately, sending a mobile command center to the scene, along with our evidence response technicians, who showed up in speedy fashion to make sure we could collect the evidence that the prosecutors and the department needed to make this announcement today. Also on scene, you were told about the brave heroics of the United States Secret Service and other members of law enforcement. And that should be celebrated by every single American. They did exactly what they were trained to do. They stopped a massive attack from becoming even worse. They stood in the way, they safeguarded America, and they should be nothing but applauded for their bravery and their dedication to their mission and their selfless sacrifice to this country. The FBI, along with standing up mobile command units, evidence tech response team, and Washington SWAT on scene, also established our NC3, our National Crisis Coordination Center, almost immediately. And almost immediately in parallel, we stood up our command center at the Washington field office under ADIC Darren Cox's leadership. Throughout the evening, we immediately began working with our Department of Justice partners to find the evidence necessary to effectuate the legal process necessary and enter into the suspect's room at the Washington Hilton successfully and lawfully and obtain the relevant evidence for exploitation. That was on scene. Back at the headquarters division and the Washington field office, we were coordinating a national scale investigation that literally spanned from coast to coast. As you heard, FBI agents, along with the interagency, were immediately dispatched to the suspect's home in California, where we conducted interviews that provided critical information about this horrific attack. We also dispatched investigators and agents to New London, Connecticut, where we conducted further interviews that provided necessary information that you will find in this criminal complaint, as the United States Attorney has just laid out. While officers were working diligently through the night to conduct those interviews, we were also conducting interviews of witnesses on scene. Those interviews are ongoing. As you know, there was almost 2,000 people there. We were sifting through and prioritizing who to talk to, and we will get to each and every one of you with any bit of relevant information. Again, we ask everybody who has any relevant information, like I did on Saturday night with the President, 1-800-CALL-FBI. Any piece of information is information we want to have and must receive. On top of the on-scene response by this FBI, the headquarters response, and the Washington field office response, the FBI flipped on its enterprise-wide response to this critical incident. What does that mean? We dispatched fixed-wing assets across the country so that we could immediately transport evidence that was acquired in California and Connecticut and sent it to our laboratories in Quantico for analysis. We collected the shell casings on scene, including the firearms and the weapons that the judge talked about. Those were also sent to our Quantico laboratories for immediate analysis. America should be proud that this FBI acted with the urgency that was needed for the moment that we had to answer. The president rightly said that we will act in a unified fashion, and it's because of President Trump's leadership and backing of the blue, every single person in law enforcement that I stood with into the late evening hours on Saturday, early evening hours on Sunday, and all day yesterday and today are thrilled to wear the badge and defend this country. Each and every one of them deserves our thanks, and I encourage everyone listening to go out there and shake the hand of a federal agent or police officer and say thank you for doing their job. Thank you for training endlessly to make sure they meet the mission requirements. And for me, as the director of the FBI, I want to thank our headquarters components for working diligently with our prosecutors and make sure that the American public knows it's not just federal agents that do this work. It's our intelligence analysts, our support staff, our laboratories, our fixed-wing assets, our critical incident response groups, our hostage rescue teams. Agents sprung into action, got out of bed, and haven't slept since. These prosecutors haven't slept since, and I promise you they're not going to be sleeping. They are going to give you every piece of evidence. As the journal said, we will make public, when appropriate, to protect the integrity of this investigation, to make sure that due process is served, and we will meet the highest standards of the Constitution as we always do. And that is when we will continue to disclose information. I know the public has a yearning for information, but just remind yourself of how much information you have already received, how transparent this administration has been. In less than 48 hours, you know almost every single thing we know. And what we have not told you yet, we will tell you in short order. So once again, from me, as director of the FBI, I want to thank the interagency. I want to thank the United States Secret Service and their director, Mark Wayne Mullen, the Secretary of Homeland Security, the Attorney General of the United States, Attorney Pirro, and Ada Cox for springing into action on a night that should have been celebrating free speech, but we will be doing it again shortly, as the president said, and we look forward to seeing you all there.
Pierre.
2 questions, please. Beyond the evidence and what the judge described as the manifesto, what other evidence can you point to that tells us that the president was the primary target of the suspect?
So we're a day and a half into the investigation. As we talked about earlier, we were able to get multiple devices from various locations, the hotel room and also his where he lived in California. We have started that process. There's nothing more that would be appropriate to share at this time until we have thoroughly gone through it, which we're doing, and we'll share that information as appropriate in the future. Second question, go ahead.
Beyond the assassination attempts against President Trump, you had someone try to burn down the mansion where the governor lives in Pennsylvania. You had those state lawmakers attacked in Minnesota. You've had 2 Israeli embassy staff members murdered in the city here. You had the Charlie Kirk assassination. You had the National Guardsman killed in the city. Can you, each of you, describe the current threat environment and what DOJ's stance is about it?
Well, you just described the current threat environment pretty accurately, which is that the political violence and rhetoric has got to stop. And that's something President Trump said right after the incident on Saturday night. It's something that Carolyn Leavitt talked about a couple hours ago. It is something that is, when you have a president who and many people in this room, if we're going to be honest about it, have done it as well. They're just as guilty as a lot of people on X. When you have reporters, when you have media just being overly critical and calling the president horrible names for no reason and without evidence, without proof, it shouldn't surprise us that this type of rhetoric takes place. If you look at what it appears that this defendant had in his past, we're talking about somebody who is college educated, who has a job, who is otherwise living his life. And we'll find out more about him, as I expect, in the coming days and weeks. But he chose to do what he did. And so our threat environment is, we are ready. I mean, I'm not going to go through what Director Patel just talked about with the way we responded. But this was something that we will always be prepared for. And it's sad that it has to happen, but it's not a new thing, unfortunately. Okay. Same.
Have you been able to determine whether the gunman fired shots? If so, how many shots he fired, and who exactly, whose bullet hit the agent?
we want to get that right. So we're still looking at that. It appears, and I don't want to overstate because we are still looking at this, that there were five shots that law enforcement fired. We have all the evidence is being examined very carefully and expeditiously, and we'll know more soon. We do believe that, as the complaint lays out, that the defendant fired it out of his shotgun, and we know that happened. But as far as getting into exacting ballistics, I'm not going to do that today because it's still being looked at and finalized.
Thank you for taking my question. You personally have called for a construction of this ballroom at the White House. The president has called for this as well. Today, the National Trust president put out a statement, says that they're grateful that everybody's okay. But, and I quote, "We are not planning to voluntarily dismiss our lawsuit, which endangers no one, and which respectfully ask the administration to follow the law. Ballroom construction is continuing unabated until June 5th at the earliest because the injunction is on hold." Where does the Justice Department go from here? And then I have a follow-up on that.
Well, we filed a motion today asking the court to do what the plaintiffs refused to do. We absolutely believe that there is no better example of why this ballroom is necessary, aside from all the very positive things the ballroom will bring to this country and to Washington, D.C., than what happened on Saturday night. You guys, many of you all were there. That's one of the only places in D.C. that you can hold an event like that due to its size and the structure of what we need. So we're basically stuck at this point in this city with having an event like that at a hotel, so underneath a ton of hotel rooms. And so the fact that aside from the fact that the ballroom is spectacular, it's going to be beautiful, it's going to make this country look great every time it's used, it's also a meaningful safety issue. And so I very much wish that the plaintiffs and their counsel would take a different view, but if they don't, we are going to continue to fight in court like we have been, and hopefully the judges at the D.C. Circuit Court will do the right thing. Beck.
Are you aware of...
Not you, the red.
Thank you. Are you investigating connections that Cole Allen allegedly had to left-wing groups? I think one is called the Wide Awakes, reportedly.
Yes. Of course we're investigating that. Now you.
Are you aware of his video game development past, including a potential shooter-style RPG game?
I've seen the news reports that talk about that. I think that the positive and negatives of this type of case is that there's a lot of people investigating this man right now, including the FBI. But the only investigations that truly matter in the court of law are the ones that Director Patel and his men and women are doing. So we'll wait for them to do that and get an answer.
Just really quick, do you know anything about his alleged Christian faith past? Because he said something about it in the manifesto.
I have read reports in the news, and I've read reports that say various things regarding his views of Christianity, his views in the past of Christianity, and I'm certainly not going to speak to news reports. I will wait, as I hope all of you would, for the investigation to continue until we actually have answers. Yeah.
Just a little technical question. You mentioned that you guys, so far, you think that Allen fired at least one shot. That doesn't say that in the affidavit yet, so I'm just curious if you can explain the discharging of weapon charge at this point.
Well, he's charged with violating 924C, discharge of a firearm during a crime of violence. So by definition, that charge means that it was discharged. I can tell you from what I know, with the understanding that we're a day and a half in, that this is the gun that he discharged. And as those of us that have ever shot one of these know, what happens when you shoot that is the casing stays inside the firearm, and then if you reload it, it pops it out. My understanding is that it was inside the firearm, but hadn't been ejected, which means that it hadn't been pulled back again. But again, I want folks to understand I'm the acting Attorney General. I'm not on the ground doing the investigation, so I'm telling you what I've been told, and we'll, if that information changes, I'm sure that we'll let you know. Yeah.
Just want to ask you about this letter that you posted yesterday that's sent from Brett Shumate to the plaintiffs in that lawsuit. It says that the Washington Hilton is, quote, demonstrably unsafe for the President of the United States. It said that with the ballroom, that Trump will no longer need to venture beyond the safety of the White House perimeter. Just engaging with those lines, was there an assessment in advance of the dinner that the Hilton was demonstrably unsafe? And if so, why was President Trump allowed to attend it? And then separately, just the idea that by building the ballroom that President Trump wouldn't need to go outside of the confines of the White House. I mean, is that something that the American people, should find acceptable, that the president would have to be, for major events, confined to the White House? It seems like kind of a castle situation.
That is obviously not what he means by that. And the fact that that question comes with respect to President Trump is laughable in the extreme. I mean, laughable in the extreme. You have a president who willingly speaks with you guys multiple times a day, I would say 7 days a week. He is active all over the country. I think with that, keeping it to the four corners of that statement, when he says demonstrably, it's demonstrated by what happened on Saturday night. So that doesn't mean that the Secret Service would ever let the president go into an unsafe environment. I know that the director of the Secret Service will be focused on making sure that we always keep him safe. And by the way, as we said before, and as anybody that was in that room knows, we were safe. We were safe. We heard a lot of loud noises that at the time many of us thought could be guns going off. It was mostly plates falling because of the staff, understandably, were running. So my reaction to that is I'll leave anything with respect to security up to the great men and women of the Secret Service. But when we talk about having an environment like the ballroom, it's an environment like what you saw last night. So an environment where you have a unique blend of cabinet members, leadership of this country, leadership of Congress, reporters and members of the public coming together for an event like that. That's different than other public-facing situations, which I have no doubt President Trump will continue to do as he said he would on Saturday night. Yeah.
Thank you. Is there, for FBI Director Patel,
Sure.
Is there any other credible threats at this time related to events in the city, including King Charles? And then separately, the manifesto, I don't really want to give too much weight to this, did mention your name in it as someone that they maybe were not targeting. Do you want to kind of elaborate on that? And then also the political motivations there.
As to the latter, no. As to the former, the FBI and the interagency is constantly evaluating intelligence provided to us by interagency collection methods. Our partners in the federal and state and local levels, we are constantly relaying that information to the White House, to the Attorney General, to the United States Attorney, specifically here in D.C. And we will always assess each piece of intelligence and base it on the credibility that it was received and give it the due weight that it has. But as the U.S. Attorney has stated, and as President Trump's task force for Washington, D.C. has shown, we have reduced crime in this city by historic levels, and we will continue to do so. We will continue to safeguard the men and women that call Washington, D.C. their home.
All right, just a couple more.
Acting Attorney General, in paragraph 14 of the complaint today, it says that the suspect fell, and you said that he was tackled. I just want to see if we can try to make sure we understand.
Well, I think that both can be true. And I would rely on the complaint because that was sworn to by an agent and not by the words out of the acting attorney general, who most certainly was not there. But I think both can be true.
The U.S. Attorney yesterday also mentioned that one of the charges possibly would be for assault on an officer, and I noticed today it's a different charge. Is this because you've determined that what he shot didn't actually strike the officer?
We're still looking at that, and I think that's something that you'll hear about in the coming days as we know the answer to that. It doesn't legally matter in that situation, but when after an event like this happens, not surprisingly, there's initial charges that we consider. Then you have the U.S. Attorney's team and the FBI looking through the evidence and figuring out what's the best thing to do, and that's what you have. Right? Just one more question. Yeah.
I have two quick questions. One,
All right, two
I
questions.
just wanted to clarify, you said the one officer fired their weapon 5 times. Was that the only officer who discharged a firearm?
I want to be very careful in answering that question because this is, when you do ballistics evidentiary collection and research, it is very complicated. So when you fire a bullet, the bullet ends up somewhere. Sometimes you find it, sometimes you don't. And so from that, with that qualifier, we believe right now that there was 5 shots fired from the same firearm. But there's a team of folks looking at this that are experts, and the evidence collection team that were in that area of the hotel where the shots were fired have worked all night. They have the evidence they collected, but it's not an exact science from the standpoint that, for example, the buckshot, when that shot, it scatters everywhere. Sometimes it just disappears, actually, depending on where it hits. So you don't have to, hopefully with that qualifier, that's where we are right now.
Question about the timeline, sir.
Hold on.
I just wanted to ask what law enforcement has learned about why he was targeting President Trump. Do you guys believe he was upset about a certain policy or a decision by the president?
The complaint lays out what I think is described as a manifesto, which is something that he allegedly sent to many folks, his family. That's what we have so far as his motivation. As the U.S. Attorney said a few minutes ago, what is clear from the complaint and from what we have so far is he was targeting President Trump. He described that in his manifesto. He was targeting administration officials. He described that. But as far as us understanding additional motivation, that's for the FBI and law enforcement. All right. Thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You've been listening to a press conference with DOJ officials, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, U.S. Attorney General Jeanine Pirro, and FBI Director Kash Patel. Todd Blanche spoke first. He had a clear message he wanted to convey. When it comes to security on Saturday night, his message was the job was done, people were safe, and in his view, it wasn't a close call, not a failure of security. The gunman was stopped, and the president was protected. On the other hand, he also pointed out that these acts of political violence, threats to democratic institutions, need to stop. That was a message that Jeanine Pirro echoed, and we also got some pictures of the guns and a TikTok of the night, as best known at this point, regarding the suspect's movements and how he got into position. Matt Gutman was listening along with us. He's been following what we know as a news organization regarding the suspect. Matt, pick up anywhere you like.
They added some things that we didn't know about the suspect's travel, but there is a major question that, Tony, has arisen from the complaint and from what the acting attorney general said just moments ago. They are saying that the incident began at 8:40 p.m. that night. Many of us, including you, many of the people in this room, were in the White House Correspondents' dinner. We began filming at 8:34. He did not explain that. They say that this is still an ongoing investigation, but we seem to know more about when and how the shots were fired. We also interviewed an eyewitness earlier today who also now tells us that the suspect came charging in, apparently opening fire, but at some point tripped and fell, that it wasn't Secret Service officers who tackled him. Then there was another barrage of gunfire. We have learned that the officer who was hit by apparently a pellet or some buckshot from the suspect's shotgun, that is the officer who fired about 5 times. They still say they are working on the ballistics, but we know a lot more than we did a couple of days ago also about those charges. We now understand that if convicted, it is very possible that this suspect could face the rest of his life in prison. Some of these charges, Tony, are consecutive. Attempted assassination of a president means life in prison. Tacked onto that is attacking an officer. That is a consecutive sentence of an additional 10 years, possibly to life. So there's a lot more coming out, and we're going to continue to bring it to you, Tony.
Yeah, and that attempt to assassinate the president, that is a new one. We just got that one today. And Jeanine Pirro, U.S. Attorney General, says more are coming. But that one alone carries a potential life sentence. With me here is senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Ed, we were listening along together, and the question of whether the Hilton was secure is a key one, and it goes to the question that the White House wants to pursue over whether they need a ballroom here on campus, so to speak.
That's right. You heard the acting attorney general say it was a safe location, but in filings that they've made to try to get a lawsuit dismissed that's challenging the construction of the building, they were suggesting in that letter that it was an unsafe space for the president to be in, and that the protection of a ballroom here would have prevented that kind of an event. That raises questions then of, well, is there suggestion or is there reason to believe that he shouldn't be leaving the White House campus if they're arguing these two things? But also important to point out, this ballroom, if completed, would hold about 1,000 people. Yeah. There were 2,600 people in attendance or ticketed to attend on Saturday night. So even this location wouldn't have been big enough. There's a handful of hotel ballrooms in this city, the convention center, that could host it. The Secret Service is familiar with all of them. But that adds to the questions that will be asked. And there is expected to be a review here at the White House regarding his security. The chief of staff,
Susie Wiles,
Susie Wiles is going to hold a meeting. They keep telling us early this week, so not necessarily today, to go over the details of what went wrong that night and what might need to change. One of the questions we raised today is, will you see the president and vice president together at public events in the future that aren't necessarily something like the State of the Union or some other government event? Would you perhaps work to keep them apart given the concerns about the line of succession? And in a campaign year, to what extent can either of them be traveling into smaller communities that don't have buildings that the Secret Service is familiar with? You've also got the World Cup coming. And the King and Queen just arrived this afternoon, another major Secret Service thing that had to be adjusted this weekend in light of the shooting.
These are questions for the safety of the president, the vice president, other cabinet members, but they're also questions for the functioning of democracy as we've come to know it and expect it in this country.
Absolutely.
Ed, I want to go to Sam Vinograd, a national security contributor for us. Sam, as Ed was pointing out and as we heard in the press conference, Todd Blanche making the argument that there was no failure, no one was unsafe, but we also had a statement not long ago from the United States Secret Service saying the key takeaway after Saturday night is that future events require enhancements at every level. So what do you make of it?
Well, the U.S. Secret Service, after there is any breakdown in security, does an assessment to see how to mitigate that going forward, Tony. And certainly the fact that an armed assailant got hundreds of yards from multiple protectees is concerning. At the same time, we have to be clear, the Secret Service does not take a cut-and-paste approach to security of any site. Instead, they do threat assessments for each particular venue for their protectees. So going forward, we should expect the U.S. Secret Service to do their own internal review about how to avoid situations like this going forward, along with Susie Wiles' review. I do want to stress one thing, however, Tony, that even if the U.S. Secret Service does provide a threat assessment saying that there are risks at a particular site, the President of the United States can still decide to proceed. So it is up to the President as to whether he chooses to listen to the Secret Service, and it is on the Secret Service to identify threats as well as whether they have the resources necessary to effectively neutralize them, Tony.
Sam, thank you very much. And Ed, we're still looking actually for confirmation on whether the president had a review from the Secret Service that said there might be holes here, but he went forward anyway?
We've asked those kinds of questions, and they haven't necessarily told us that this was an unsafe situation. Again, this is a hotel and a location and an event that the Secret Service knows very well. Hundreds of presidential events held there over the last several decades, and this dinner there every decade. And it is designed specifically with rooms for holding the president or vice president, with garages that he can enter.
Special
they know
entrance,
it very well.
he's not going to be seen by the public.
Right, because it's the site where Ronald Reagan was he was shot back in 1981, and ever since they've been enhancing that building.
Yeah, they have. And the threat environment has changed. Ed, thank you very much. Sam, thank you very much. Matt, as well. Our coverage will continue on CBS News 24/7, your local news, and tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News Special Report. I'm Tony DeCopel at the White House.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Reiser, and we are continuing our coverage of Saturday's shooting at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Federal authorities, they're just providing an update on the investigation and suspect. He has been identified as 31-year-old Cole Allen, charged with using a firearm during a crime of violence, assault on a federal officer using a dangerous weapon, and attempting to assassinate the President of the United States. Prosecutors say the suspect traveled across the country to carry out this attack from where he lived near Los Angeles to Chicago and finally to D.C. He was armed, they say, with a shotgun, handgun, and 3 knives, but never breached the room where the event, where a number of journalists, Trump administration officials, and the president himself were sitting. During that press conference just moments ago, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche said law enforcement did not fail and did exactly what they were supposed to do. Let's bring in Anna Schechter, head of our Crime and Public Safety Unit. So, Anna, that statement aside, we know Sam Vinograd has some questions, as do some other experts and people who were there, questions about how this was able to happen. But what do we know about the evidence behind the most serious charge, attempting to assassinate the president?
Well, one, the fact that he was apprehended as he charged through those metal detectors. He was armed with that shotgun. He is being charged with discharging that. It's unclear if the gun went off when he fell. It clearly says in the affidavit that he fell. So that's a little bit of new information that we've gotten over the last couple of hours. But then also in the affidavit, they actually copy and paste from this email that we've been reporting on for the last more than 24 hours that he timed to send to his family just as he was carrying out the attack. So the excerpt that they include in this affidavit lists out his targets naming administration officials, high ranking to low ranking. So what he means is in order of his priorities, top ranking officials are his priority. Interestingly enough, he excluded Kash Patel, the FBI director, in that. But then there's another line that I think is important for us to report on. He also states that he is willing to plow through anyone who was also there because they willingly purchased a ticket to essentially hear President Donald Trump speak. So all of that is included, and surely prosecutors are going to lean heavily on that because it speaks to intent. Now, the other thing I think is interesting is they're stressing that he crossed state lines with these weapons, which is also he can be charged with a federal offense. But I expect to see some more charges, perhaps even terrorism-related charges, if they find they have the evidence. But they kept it pretty thin and locked into the evidence that they currently have.
Okay, so let's go back to sort of the aftermath and the security review post-attack. How are law enforcement agencies handling that review?
Well, this is a great question. I think the biggest question is, why was the President of the United States and top cabinet officials, why were they allowed to be there at a hotel where anyone could rent a hotel room and check into the hotel? So that is a fundamental question. Now, what the Secret Service is saying is that they secured the perimeter of the event and that they did not everything right, but that everything went as planned in that the assailant was not able to gain entry into the ballroom. Now, just within the last couple of hours, we just got a statement from the Secret Service saying that they are acknowledging that they need to take a look at how this person was able to get inside the hotel in the first place. So that was actually a big moment and a big step, and kind of pitch perfect if they want to portray that they know that not everything went perfectly and they need to reassess given this incredibly high threat environment. Lindsay, you know, we've been doing this for a long time. I don't think I've ever seen so many factors with the war in Iran, heightened political rhetoric, increasing numbers of political threats and political violence in this country. So it's a new ball game, and the Secret Service is having to completely reorient based on this threat environment.
What do you make of that time differential that Matt Gutman was talking about in the special report there? Because when they laid out the timeline, they said that the president and first lady entered the building at 8 p.m. That the suspect, according to Judge Jeanine Pirro, now the U.S. attorney for D.C., said the suspect knew they entered the building at 8 p.m. and rushed the building at 8:40. But Matt said that he and many other people in that ballroom started rolling at 8:34. So there's sort of
at 8:34. Yes, and you know, my colleagues and I were sort of combing through this document and picking things like that out. Look, I don't read too much into that. I see a lot of indictments. This is a very high-profile one. They probably should have said approximately 8:34 or 8:35 p.m. Instead, they went with approximately 8:40. I'm not sure why they did that, but you know, police and prosecutors, there's a team of people working on this document, and it's a chaotic environment, lots of new information coming through. They're getting new interviews with family members, and maybe it was an oversight, but I just don't read that much into it because I see these types of mistakes all the time.
Okay, Anna Schechter, we will talk to you more tonight on the Daily Report. Thank you. Let's bring in CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro. Aaron, we know that you were inside when all of this unfolded, and I'm sorry to keep making you sort of relive it. If you want to move past this, we certainly can. But if you want to talk about your experience, we'd love to hear.
Lindsay, thanks for asking. I was at one of the tables near the main entrance that should the gunman have gotten past the magnetometers and the Secret Service, the tables where I sat with many of my CBS News colleagues and some other administration guests would have been the first tables the shooter could have potentially seen. Thankfully, that was not the case. We heard about 4 to 5 loud thuds. At first, there was a thought that crossed my mind that maybe it was something from the kitchen, plates falling, and then you started to smell what was gunpowder, as it was revealed later, as we learned. From then on, I went down to the lower platform in the ballroom and took cover along with some of my other colleagues and other guests as I saw Secret Service agents kind of jump from table to table as well as approach the podium to secure the vice president, the president, and many of the high-ranking officials that were there. After that, you started to hear rumblings from both the administration officials as well as Secret Service that the shooter had been taken down, and we were waiting for the all-clear before me and some of my other colleagues were escorted out of the building and went to the Bureau and then eventually the White House, where I was able to be in the press briefing room during the president's remarks after the shooting.
Well, thank you for sharing that experience and just the fact that you could even smell it. Just remarkable how close you were. How would you say the White House is responding to this? And has the president said anything about this since not only his press conference that night, but his interview with 60 Minutes' Norah O'Donnell?
I'll start with his interview with 60 Minutes. The president, when asked kind of about the timeline, the seconds of getting him off the stage, said in a way that he did not make it easy for Secret Service because he wanted to see what was going on. The president, of course, has unfortunately had experience with situations similar to this after the Butler, Pennsylvania rally during the 2024 campaign. At one point, he said, quote, "I wasn't worried. We live in a crazy world." And he really showed a lot of praise for the actions that Secret Service took that evening. Today, the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, who told reporters last week that it would have been her last briefing last week because she was about to go on maternity leave, held a 1 p.m. briefing today and called for a de-escalation in violence, but also showed where the administration is maybe going with the messaging on this going forward, saying that it is the fault, the political violence, the rhetoric is at the fault of the Democratic Party, noting that some are campaigning on President Trump being a threat to democracy, especially ahead of the midterm. So that was a key moment, key quote from her to show where the administration is going with this as we get into the peak of the midterm season.
Okay, Aaron Navarro, we will continue to talk to you throughout the afternoon, evening, and again, I'll see you on the Daily Report. I'm Lindsay Reiser, and thank you for watching. For now, coverage continues right now on CBS News 24/7.
Welcome in on this Monday. I'm Elizabeth Cook. Here's a look at the 4 big headlines we're following at 4 right now. The man accused in the shooting at the White House Correspondents' Dinner is now facing 3 charges, including for attempting to assassinate the president.
Make no mistake, this was an attempted assassination of the President of the United States, with the defendant making clear what his intent was.
And King Charles and Queen Camilla now on U.S. soil ahead of a historic 4-day visit to the U.S. They meet with President Trump this afternoon. We'll have that for you live. Plus, it's billionaire versus billionaire. Why the world's richest man, Elon Musk, is suing OpenAI and its CEO, Sam Altman. And people in North Texas are cleaning up after a round of deadly tornadoes. What's ahead in the forecast? This is CBS News 24/7. Welcome in. The suspect in this weekend's shooting at the White House Correspondents' Dinner has now been charged with attempting to assassinate President Donald Trump. Cole Allen made his first appearance in federal court as investigators dig into his background and search for even more evidence. Federal law enforcement just wrapped up a briefing on the charges and the latest on this investigation.
The first count is attempted assassination of the President of the United States. This count is punishable by up to life in prison. The second count is interstate transportation of a firearm to commit a felony. This is punishable by up to 10 years in prison. And the third count is discharge of a firearm during a crime of violence, which is punishable by a mandatory minimum term of imprisonment of 10 years, a maximum of life, and the 10 years is consecutive to any other sentence imposed.
We have team coverage. CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro has a reaction from the White House. But let's start with CBS News senior crime and public safety producer Anna Schechter. Anna, great to be with you. We just heard officials from the Department of Justice speak. What do you make of that big charge, the attempt to assassinate the president?
That is a big charge, and we will see. I noticed that they included an excerpt from that email that he sent to family just before he allegedly went down to attempt this attack. This is very key because he lays out that he is targeting administration officials, ranking them top to bottom. So highest ranking officials are who he's most targeting, and prosecutors clearly are going to lean into that email as the evidence they need to sustain a charge like that, particularly because it's unclear how he actually fired off that shot with that shotgun. From this affidavit, it doesn't make it crystal clear if he knowingly, with intent, fired that shotgun to hit that officer. Even though he was rushing, it states that he fell. So there's a little bit of murky gray area there, which is interesting to see. But in that email, he explicitly says who he is targeting, Liz.
There will likely be other charges filed at a later date. And I'm curious, what are we going to be looking for there? Are we talking about terrorism charges, do you think?
This is a great question, Liz, and I do think that we could be talking about terrorism charges right now. And Todd Blanche said this, they are investigating a couple of different groups that he might have been associated with, and they are going to try to find evidence where they could build a case for that. Now, they want to be successful in this prosecution. So if they don't find enough, they might not bring that charge. They don't want a charge thrown out. But if they find enough evidence that he might have been working with a group influenced by a group that is on the FBI's radar, they very well might. I also noticed that they are leaning into crossing state lines with those weapons. So that can sometimes help support a terrorism charge as well. So it remains to be seen what comes down. 3 charges, that does look a little bit thin based on how high profile this was, the attention it's garnering, and one of the targets appears to be the President of the United States. So I do expect to see more.
I'm curious to see how this investigation plays out, Anna, because unlike, say, previous cases like, say, Luigi Mangione, where we weren't quite sure who the suspect was and there was this massive manhunt, in this case, they're quite sure that this individual was the person who fired those shots. How does that impact an investigation like this?
Well, this is such a good point, Liz, because Luigi Mangione absolutely came to mind when I read the email yesterday, that this is someone with a clear worldview who has orchestrated a justification for violence based on political reasons, very similar to Luigi Mangione. Here's the difference. All of this happened in a Washington, D.C. hotel with multiple federal agents and law enforcement under one roof with the suspect. So that's why things are happening so quickly. Within an hour, we had surveillance video posted by the President of the United States to Truth Social showing him charging the metal detectors. We had an image of him being handcuffed, lying on the ground. So, and we also had this email because guess what? Law enforcement went up to the 10th floor, searched his room, got into his laptop, and found this email. And they believe that he had actually programmed it to be sent just as he was carrying out the attack. So that's why everything is happening faster. It also is a little bit of a tighter hold on the information. So that could potentially be helpful to the prosecution. If you look at the way Mangione is playing out, there is a lot of drama between prosecutors and defense. And the previous attorney general stated she wanted prosecutors to go for the death penalty. A judge threw that out. There's kind of some infighting between the Southern District of New York and federal prosecutors. So that case is very complex. Let's see if this one turns out to be as complex. Because of the scenario, it might actually help the prosecution. One more thing, look at the Ryan Routh precedent. So that was the man in Florida who went to the golf course where Trump was playing, and he also had a gun and was charged. And ultimately he was prosecuted. That kind of a precedent could help the prosecution in this case, but it remains to be seen, Liz.
Anna Schechter, thank you so much for that insight. I'm sure we'll stay on top of this. All right, meanwhile, CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro joins me now. Aaron, great to be with you. You're in Washington. What's been the reaction around D.C. today and calls for de-escalation after this attempted shooting at the White House Correspondents' Dinner?
Liz, good to be with you. We got some details from the White House during a press briefing from White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt about the security from this weekend and the security going forward. Leavitt reiterated that President Trump still has his trust in the Secret Service, that he believes that all the protocols will be followed or were followed. But she also confirmed that the White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles will be meeting with leadership at the Department of Homeland Security and Secret Service at some point this week to talk safety and security for the president going forward, as there are many events, public events, that he is scheduled to attend for the rest of the year. I'm thinking of the America 250 events, including the UFC fight at the White House, as well as the expected ramp up of travel for the midterm elections. But you also saw Leavitt and the White House talk about the reasoning behind this and the just general rhetoric that has led to political violence, not only this past weekend, but in recent months. Take a listen to Leavitt talk about disagreement in this country and where she wants to see it going forward.
We can and we should have fierce disagreement in this country. As you all know, we disagree often, myself in this role and all of you in the news media, but those disagreements must remain peaceful. Debating, peaceful protesting, and voting are how we need to settle disagreements, not bullets.
Now, during her briefing, Leavitt pinned the blame on the Democratic Party and some in the media, noting how some Democratic candidates for the midterm elections have made comments calling President Trump a dictator, saying that he is a threat to democracy, and in her belief that that is adding to the uptick in political violence that we've seen in recent years.
Aaron, you mentioned looking forward to these future events here we have coming up, and we have one today. I mean, I want to take a live look at the White House. We're waiting for King Charles and Queen Camilla to arrive. They landed just about an hour ago. Are there any security adjustments or concerns with their visit, given Saturday night's shooting?
We had been told that the state visit will proceed as planned. There have been hints that the schedule for the 4-day visit could change. That is not necessarily that uncommon for a foreign leader coming and staying in the U.S. for multiple events. We have an understanding that the British officials will be relying on Secret Service following their guidance in terms of security. And in that 60 Minutes interview that he did, President Trump said that King Charles, in his words, will be very safe, that the grounds at the White House are very safe, and that King Charles will be staying there on campus. He also said that he spoke to him Sunday morning and relayed that they are looking forward to being here in the U.S. for this visit.
All right, Aaron, don't go too far, because we're going to check back in with you when the royals officially arrive to the White House. We'll see you in a little bit. All right, we just got CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson in. I want to get your reaction, Jessica, to what Trump administration officials had to say about the charges in this case.
Make no mistake, this was an attempted assassination of the President of the United States, with the defendant making clear what his intent was. And that intent was to bring down as many of the high-ranking cabinet officials as he could.
Okay, you saw the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Jeanine Pirro, there, adamant that this shooting was, in fact, an attempted assassination of the president. We just saw what she said there. I want to get your reaction to that, probably the most serious charge, the attempted assassination of the president there, Jessica. Do you think that there is a strong enough case there?
So I will just caution we're at the very beginning in terms of a strong enough case. I mean, we do obviously have a lot of public reporting, but what you need for a case like this is really two things. You need to show specific intent to kill the president, not members of the administration, not high-ranking officials, but specific intent to kill the president. And then number two, you need to show that there was a substantial step taken to do that. Now, obviously, in this case, we have a lot of public reporting that indicates that Allen had, in fact, we all saw the video, crossed the security border. Reporting indicates that he fired shots. This manifesto that we just have been talking about indicates that there was a motive to harm high-ranking Trump administration officials. The key will be showing that he had that intent, not just to say, I want to harm people in the administration, but I want to kill the president, and here's a specific step I took to substantially try and effectuate that crime.
I asked this question to Anna Schechter, the fact that this suspect, he's not necessarily somebody that you're not sure whether or not he committed this crime. There's multiple witnesses. He was tackled to the ground. Is the fact that we probably know that this is the person that committed these crimes, how does that play into the legal case here? Is this really about what he's going to be charged with and what he's going to be sentenced with? Is that what we're talking about here?
Yes, and I thought you had a great conversation with Anna Schechter about this. We're not really searching for suspects. As long as the public reporting holds, and as long as all of that video that we've seen holds, then I think we're just looking at whether or not there are additional charges against this individual. I have not seen anything to indicate that we are going to embark on a manhunt for somebody else, that we have the wrong suspect, that there are accomplices. So this is a very different case from, we know that there was a crime that committed. We're trying to figure out who committed it. We know somebody very likely certainly has been charged with federal crimes, may be charged with additional federal crimes. And we're just trying to figure out which crimes are appropriate for him to be charged with and what the evidence will show in terms of whether or not prosecutors would be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he committed those crimes.
And the evidence being, as you mentioned, that manifesto, but also what he allegedly told family and friends before he committed this crime. I'm curious how that's going to ultimately play into the rest of this trial.
Usually that type of evidence of talking to family and friends, what was his state of mind? What was he talking about? Did he talk to you about any plans he had to, buy a gun, take a train, cross state lines, cross a security border? I think much of that evidence is frankly about finding leads, not proof. That is about talking to people, is trying to find other evidence that later will come into trial, and trying to prove motive in this case. Obviously, as we just talked about, that first charge, specific intent to kill the president, that's going to depend on what was actually in his head and his motive at the time.
Jessica Levinson, always great to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Well, coming up, Britain's King Charles is meeting with President Trump as UK-US relations are being strained with the war in Iran. We'll have a preview of their visit. That's next.
The only way to get a 360-degree understanding of America is to get out there in America. There really is no swing at all when it comes to the priorities of everyday people. We care about how secure our job is, whether we can plan on retiring with dignity, whether our kids can have a brighter future than we have today. These are the fundamentals of American life, and I think they can be again.
Why doesn't he tell Republicans, come into my office, let's hammer this thing out?
Margaret, it's a totally fair question.
Politics isn't a game. Why are you opposed to this deployment?
It's unconstitutional.
Politics is about policy. I'm a voracious consumer of information, and I'm impatient. I don't like to be spun. To be moderator of Face the Nation means bringing the most powerful stakeholders to the table to become better informed.
We don't want to accept that there's evil that walks amongst us, but it does.
You know how when you meet somebody, you can't put your finger on it, but something's not right?
You never know what anybody is capable of.
I am a serial killer who's only killed once.
Did you think when this goes public, this town's gonna be shocked?
Absolutely.
When you're dealing with a 30-year-old cold case, it seems like there's not a lot of hope.
We knew there was a monster out there, and we were going to find him and get him.
Look at him, just coming around the corner like that. We started tracking the area.
When did this accident scene become a crime scene?
Police! You called him a lying liar who lies about lying.
Do you know why we're stopping you today?
What makes you so sure that you stabbed your sister while you were sleepwalking?
I never got a chance to see her one last time.
Such injustice. I can't believe they did this to her.
But no matter how hard it gets, never give up.
I'm Natalie Morales with 48 Hours. Did you have anything to do with Joanna Hunter's death?
This is a family that just wants justice.
I'm Tony DeCopel from a region at war tonight.
To tell the story,
Hello up there.
you have to be there, seeing it firsthand.
I'm Tony. I work for CBS. Can you clarify what this war is about? How do you avoid this becoming a death trap? This war only seems